So my name is Dunbar, and I'm with City of Eugene and Public Works. There's a couple projects going on that you probably noticed. One of them is the intersection at River Road and Irving and Hunsaker. That project is getting, well, it's about halfway done. We're having a little trouble moving the utility poles at that corner, and that has messed up the phasing a little bit. But we've paved Hunsaker so far, so that side has been done in terms of the intersection. I'll talk about the Hunsaker project next. But in terms of the intersection, we've done the Hunsaker side and the sidewalks on both the north and south side. Those sidewalks will connect into the Hunsaker project that I'll talk about next. We've also included a planter, which you can see a little concrete square. That's what that's going to be. So that's necessary for stormwater. And then we're gonna do the curb ramps at the corner of River Road and all the rest of those corners after we get those utility poles moved. So that has been sort of an issue right now. And so we're getting there, and we're about halfway done with that project. Hopefully we can wrap that up end of October is what we're hoping.
Reed, you mentioned something magical about bicycles at that intersection.
I sure did. So this one is gonna be our first protected intersection. And if you want to know what that is, just go to protectedintersection.com, and there's a pretty cool video on there that explains what that is. But essentially, what used to happen at that intersection, like on River Road, is there were bike lanes on both sides and then a bunch of travel lanes in the middle. And then so everybody just kind of went at the same time. What's going to happen now is that the bike lanes are actually going to sort of join the sidewalk. And so we'll have sort of the pedestrian and bicycle movements, which are our most vulnerable users at the intersection, moving in one phase, and not all the traffic is going to move at a different phase. And so what we're hoping is that will increase safety and reliability of that intersection and work better for everybody, regardless of your ability or comfort riding a bike, for example. And so that'll be our first one in the city. And so we'll see how that one works out, but we're pretty excited about it. Yep, okay. And then the second project I wanted to talk about is Hunsaker, what we used to call Beaver Hunsaker, and it's really adding sidewalks and bike lanes and repaving Hunsaker Lane from River Road really all the way to Ross Lane. Lane County built a shared use path that connects to the West Bank path, and then it goes all the way up to Ross Lane and then stops. A couple things that we've talked about since then is extending that path all the way to Tato on that north side, because kind of ends during mid-curve, mid-radius is not where we would want that to stop. And so part of the project is moving that path and extending it all the way to Tato, and then extending sidewalks all the rest of the way to River Road on the north side, and on the south side, sidewalks from River Road all the way to Ross Lane. It will also include bike lanes on both sides and travel lanes, one eastbound, one westbound. That project is in the 30% design, and so we're very early in the design concept. We've just started the environmental review. The right-of-way process starts in 2024. So next year, if you live along Hunsaker, you're going to get a letter, and the letter is going to say, hey, your property is going to be impacted in these ways if we have to widen out and it impacts your property. And what we would like you to do is to call us and say, well, how is that going to impact me specifically? What's going to happen to my driveway? What's going to happen to my trees? I have a planter here that I'd like to save. And then we'll come out and we'll talk with you, and we'll figure out how much of that stuff needs to be moved or not during that process. So that'll happen in early 2024, hopefully. That process is fully funded. And then we'll do the design in 2024, and then hopefully bid that thing for construction in 2025. So that's coming up pretty soon. The last project I wanted to talk about, which unfortunately there hasn't been much movement on, is the West Bank path extension. That path that I mentioned that Lane County built on the east side of Beaver Street that ends at Ross Lane. There's a project to extend that to the north and potentially all the way to the Santa Clara Community Park. We've had some turnover at the office, and so the engineer I had been working with is no longer with us. So I have a new engineer, and we're starting the environmental review. Our right-of-way phase doesn't start until early 2024. We're moving some money around, and we're going to have surveyors out there pretty soon I know that we've talked about that before, and so we're gonna send out postcards to folks in the area so that they know when we're coming out, and we'll get in touch with Delta Sand and Gravel too before we send anybody out into the field to sort of look at what the extents could be. And once I have those extents, which is what I've been waiting for, then I can come back to this meeting and potentially hold another open house and talk about the different alignments that we might be considering in terms of where that path would start and land. Right now I can't do that because we haven't gone out there and been able to start the environmental survey. And that's just a function of the funding that we have and when we can start the right of way phase. So I'm working as hard as I can on that and going as fast as we can. We just had some challenges from a staff perspective and also from funding, but hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we'll get surveys out there and I'll be able to touch back base with you guys. So you know when to schedule the next meeting, because I would really like to talk about what that path will look like, any lighting that we choose to add to it, and obviously where it's going to go, which again, I don't know yet.
There's a question behind.
I just wanted to know, is the land use priority in plan exclusively in the realm of the city, or is it also in conjunction with the rules and the decision making of the county as well?
Can you rephrase that so people don't understand?
In the land use plan? Are you talking specifically about the shared use path I'm talking about?
The West End extension, is
Yeah.
that plan exclusively being carried out by the city, or is it in conjunction with the county? Because it's connecting to that county path that they just made.
Right, so there's gonna be, I will repeat the question. The question is the extension of the West Bank path a city project, city plan, or is that somehow related to the county and the county path that is already there? Yeah, yep, okay, so there's gonna be some jurisdictional transfer that's going to start happening as we start the Hunsaker Lane project. As I mentioned, that's gonna be basically a full urban standards project. It's gonna include curb gutters, sidewalk, and bike lanes. Once it's up to urban standard, the City of Eugene is gonna take jurisdiction of that. We're also in negotiations with them about Beaver Street and the path that's adjacent to that. So very likely that will become City of Eugene path, and the path that we plan to extend north to the Santa Clara Community Park is a city project. And so one of the things we need to figure out is where the path is gonna go, how to assemble the right of way in order to build that, and then who to talk to in order to get that to happen. It's just outside of current city limits. But we have examples of parks like Golden Gardens Park that are currently outside the city limits, although I think we just adjusted that. And so those things do happen until infrastructure sort of catches up to where these facilities occur. So eventually, I think that's all gonna be City of Eugene jurisdiction.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was an excellent answer. Exactly where I wanted to go.
And a follow-up with that, would they also be doing enforcement in the city?
Yes. Well, to the degree that we can do enforcement will happen on City of Eugene facilities.
Nobody's doing 25 on Beaver.
I know. So Beaver Street is also going to include traffic calming. So the question was specifically about speeding on Beaver, because there was a speed reduction on there, which Wayne County did to 25 miles per hour. When we do the urban standards project on Hunsaker, that's going to include speed bumps as well. So people aren't going to be driving slower.
Good.
Generally speaking, that works, yes.
Thank you.
Randy?
So the $2 million grant that the city received a couple years ago for the bike path extension, was that for construction or just planning?
All of it. So the question was, is the grant that we got for the West Bank path just for planning or is it for construction? It's for planning, right of way acquisition, design, and construction. All of it.
So to be clear, you had told us the plan would be ready in 2023.
Right.
And now that's not happening and you're projecting when exactly, or you don't know again?
I don't know again, and I'm sorry about that. We are moving as fast as we can. Like I said, we haven't been able to start the survey process. That'll happen this fall. Once we start the survey process, I can start talking to folks. about the potential alignments, and then we can start the engineering process in 24. So I'm hopeful that I can still schedule a meeting with the neighborhood in 2023, although it might be late 2023. Just as soon as I get some information back, and I know what's reasonable and what's not reasonable, then we can start to have the conversation, but I haven't been able to start that process.
And when you scheduled this meeting, how will the people in the area be notified? Because tonight, we didn't get it until kind of late, and we like to share with all of our neighbors, because we know that everybody doesn't belong to the Santa Clara community, or we didn't have time to do that.
Sure, I can answer that. Go to the Santa Clara Community.org website and put your email address in the right-hand column, and you'll get all the notifications.
And I understand that, thank you, but not all of our neighbors have the ability or have done it or do it. So that's just the nature of human beings.
So we also sent out postcards for the last open house, which was up at the middle school. We'll do that again before the next one.
All right.
So a mailing will be part of it. Yes, it was.
And when you let people know, you have to let people know, just like the whole person said, everything said 7 times. You have to let people know more than one way.
Right.
So we appreciate.
So we'll work with the neighborhood association through their channels to get it out. We'll send out a mailing. It'll be on the city's calendar, and we'll send it out to our social media as well.
So at this point, you have not, even though the initial plan was to use Admiral Street, you haven't decided that that is gonna be your main path.
Correct. However, one of the things I think that in talking with some of the design engineers, we're probably gonna end up very close to Admiral Street. And I don't see going past Admiral Street without connecting to Admiral Street, sort of against our policy not to add that connectivity. One of the things I heard from the folks on Admiral Street is about the sidewalks that were a potential. I think we really need to talk about that. I think the connection is definitely going to happen. I don't know if the path is gonna continue on to Zane Lane or not. We haven't been able to do the surveys for that or be able to price that out yet.
You know, I mean, as far as I know, most people go over the line, they're connected to our street, but for it to come out at the end of Admiral, it's just so problematic, and then to channel it down.
To get across River Road 1.
That's, you're
Yeah.
really 4 curves, and the other thing is only anecdotal, but I've been walking in that neighborhood for 12 years now, very regularly, and so have a number of my neighbors. I almost never walk on the sidewalk. It's not safe, the sidewalks are dirty, they have stuff, you're gonna fall, animal feces, etc. And I don't ever see bicyclists on the sidewalk. I mean, literally on the bike path by the school, 2 times I've seen somebody in 12 years. And once was a dad with a little kid, and you know, it's like real bicycle riders. I know you're a bicycle rider, Kate. I know Cindy is. I know these guys are. You don't ride on, and that path over there that you had initially talked about connecting to is so problematic, cracked and compromised, and yeah.
To be clear, a sidewalk is a walking facility, and so the idea of connecting a sidewalk to the shared use path is not for people riding bikes or scooters or roller skating. It's for people who are pushing strollers and walking with their dogs, that sort of thing. And so, yeah, we would expect people on bikes to take the street
Right.
in the local neighborhood streets.
And it just seems like it's such a waste of money to tear up the whole street for sidewalks. When, so it is dead.
And we'll talk about that at the next meeting, because, yeah, I know that's a point of contention, and, like I said, once we figure out what the alignments might be, then we can start to put some numbers behind them, as well as the right-of-way acquisition, and we'll know how much money we have to deliver the project. And so that may come with some cuts, like the sidewalk, which we thought we might be able to afford, we may not be able to afford it, we might not want it, and we'll have to talk about that.
The path is still the option, or the primary option, or the only option to have the path here left and go along the tree line. Is that still the plan? Is that the only one pretty much considered?
Well, we're gonna look at a couple different alignments through the Delta Sand property. I've also met with some folks on Tato Street, or I'm sorry, Echo Lane. And Echo Lane is not where we want this path to end. We want the path to connect to the existing path on Beaver Street. And so, as you just, so look at where that path ends at Ross Lane and draw a line north. I mean, we need to go that way.
Private drive.
It's not, it's public, although I've got some different accounts on that, but we don't want We don't want to deal with Echo Lane. And so as you think about the alignments, how do we go north from there? There's more slopes in that property than I thought that there was. And I think most of the buildable area is going to be probably closer to the very western side of the Delta property,
So the east Santa Clara Canyon,
East Santa Clara Channel.
so they're gonna follow the water.
There's two questions on, the Zoom. So whoever guessed it says, when will the northbound lane be open? I'm assuming that means on River Road.
That is all part of the intersection that we're currently working with EWEB to move the utility poles on. Because we're not the same organization, we have to schedule these things in advance. Somebody moves something, then the whole schedule gets moved. That's what's been happening. And so we're trying to do that. We're trying to get to that intersection, get those sidewalks and sidewalk access ramps poured, but we need the utility poles to move before we can get in there and do that. And any day now, hopefully that should happen and we'll be out of there as soon as we can.
And then there's another question, what is the large corner vacant lot for?
That's still a good question. You might know more about that than I do.
Yeah, it's owned by Lane Transit District and we are working with them or trying to have the city work with them to make some sort of development that would have amenities for the neighborhood. But it's privately owned and we don't have control over it. So we'll see how that goes. You can always call me personally and we can have a long conversation about it. But tonight is not that night. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Reed, so much.